Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast.
I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and so honored and excited to have my friend Steve on the show here. Steve, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, we've known each other now about 10 years. Got to
Yep.
do a lot of fun stuff together, both in this thing that we call C2 and also in the Abide Ministries. But you've got a background, military background, as well as business owner and executive coach now for many years. So you're, the kind of guy and gal I like to have on the show here to talk about leadership, and really like to maybe give you a moment just to introduce yourself to the audience, and then let's get into some good questions.
Well, name is Steve Van Ooteghem, and born in Michigan and raised in northern Indiana. And I went into the Marine Corps after a college education at Indiana University. And I worked for Ross Perot at EDS. And after a couple other opportunities there, we started some businesses. And part of that was we were living in Florida then. And we got involved with a guy named Buck Jacobs, who had created C and became a C12 member, my wife and I. And then after that, about 4 years, went on and became a professional motivational speaker for about 15 years. And then when 2008 hit and everything collapsed, we had 2020. We decided I was offered a position from Buck Jacobs to be a C12 chair. So we actually moved to Houston, Texas, and we were in Tampa, Florida, which was our dream place to be for 21 years. And so here we are in Houston, Texas. And I remember Houston because about 40 years ago, I came to Houston. I was a national sales manager for a company, and I had never been to Houston before. I rented a car, and I wore glasses at that time. And when I got out of the car, it was August. And when I got out of the car, my glasses fogged over, and it took me 20 minutes to get them clear again. And I said to myself, who in the world would ever live in this godforsaken place? Well, here we are. Big principle there is you never know what God's going to do.
That's too funny. Yeah. I've heard missionaries over my years say the one place I told God I wanted to never go to is the one place He sent me to.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And I am married to Carolyn, who I went to grade school and high school with. We have 3 sons and 3 grandchildren, and we've been married 54 years. So
wow.
I'm very blessed.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You are. Yes, you are. Well,
I don't know
Steve,
how you've done
it. Well, she must be one amazing lady. And I know she is, because we consider her a friend as well. So we'd like to get right to it here on the Leader's Journey and dig into some fun questions. So if you would, can you share a story from your past that you feel has really influenced who you are today and your leadership style?
Sure. When I was 17, my mother was ill, and I didn't realize how ill. And she passed away one morning when I was the only one in the house. I was the youngest child. And I actually saw her there, and that was pretty difficult. And then my father and I moved in with my brother, and he actually had a heart attack 4 months later. So I lost both of my parents within 4 months of each other. And that really affected my leadership style because I felt quite desperate. My brother was 8 years older than I am. He was just married, and they had a little girl. And it was not a very harmonious way to live. And I ended up going into the Marine Corps after I graduated. I went to a local college, Indiana University there. I worked 3 jobs getting through that, and then went into the Marine Corps during the end of Vietnam.
So that's very difficult at 17 years old to lose both parents.
Yes, it is.
Did you start to look to as your mentor or role model, or did you?
Well,
season?
Carolyn's father, that's my wife, Carolyn, he was a dentist. And what happened is I started really dating her 6 months before all that happened with my mom and dad. And it's just wonderful how God, knows what's going to happen and sometimes produces people that can really help. So he was a dentist, and it was very gentle. I still have my teeth because of him. I'm sure that would have affected that. He was just very kind to me, and just a tremendous. He liked everybody. He was kind to everybody, and that was a huge mentor for me. And I also loved baseball, and I was a football player in high school, baseball. And I said to myself after my dad passed away, it was in January when baseball season came around, I decided I needed to quit high school, change everything, and get these jobs so that I can, pay my brother some money and so forth. And he came up to me one time and he just said, "Let us know what we can do to help you. Glad to have you here." And he really became over the years even more influential than my biological father was. So his name was Don Schwartz. So that was an incredible blessing. He did say, "Stay in school. You're probably going to want to do that." And I didn't listen to him, which was a series of other things that I didn't listen to people along my career. I wish I had done that, because I ended up making $235. That's all I made in those 4 months. I went to work for a filthy manufacturing facility. I had to get on a bus. It was wintertime. It was just a mess. It was very lonely. So, but I made it through.
Persevered.
Yeah, persevered, so to speak. I had to.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Marine Corps, really huge leaders there, leadership all the time. And I graduated. I was in a PLC program, platoon leaders class, and you had to go through boot camp in your sophomore to senior year for 8 weeks, and then junior to senior year for 8 weeks, and then you were commissioned as second lieutenant. So that's how I got into the Marine Corps and saw some incredible leaders there, and really learned a lot about discipline. And later on, when we graduated from college, I married Carolyn. And then we went out to Quantico, Virginia, which is where the Marine Corps training is, and became a second lieutenant and a platoon commander eventually. We went up in California.
Yeah. So how many years were you in the Marine Corps?
Almost 4. I was
Okay.
supposed to be 5, but I was at the end of it, 72, 73, 74-ish. And of course, they wound down. They pulled out of Vietnam. But I was an infantry officer, so I was a platoon commander and a company commander eventually.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service.
Sure.
My question is, we often hear military is a great training ground, often hear military has great leadership exposure and opportunities. For somebody that didn't spend time in the military, what was it like? Can you articulate a bit about what it was why is the military leadership so effective in raising up other leaders?
Well, I think when you're, that age, 19, 20, and 21, and so forth, you play athletics. Coaches sometimes are good leaders. I had some good coaches, but when you get in the Marine Corps and you know that there's danger involved, there's people that truly sacrifice, and the medals that they get and the combat and so forth. And when we went through those trainings, those 8-week trainings, we had people that had just come back from Vietnam. And it was pretty raw. And you saw the stories and you heard the stories. And what they always mentioned was leadership and being sacrificial and caring about the men and caring about the objective. And so the big thing was the objective. Search for and locate the enemy and then dispose of them is basically the way they go. So you get caught up in that culture and you see some guys that are really, really tremendous leaders. And I have friends still to this day that were in the Marine Corps with me, and I still think very highly of them.
So do you think there's some leadership thought that there's a bonding that happens in experiences, and so one of the reasons, in leadership, it was really hot, I guess, in the 90s. These rivers and ropes courses, and go out as a leadership team and do things together, stuff that you as a Marine would consider easy, but for Fortune 500 guys that didn't do military, go through a mud pit or climb a rock wall or whatever as a team.
Sure.
Do you think there's some truth to that?
Oh, absolutely. No question. You go through, I can remember one morning, this is the first summer I was in there, and I'm like, 19 years old or something, and we're sleeping. They get you up at 4 a.m. in the morning. And of course, a lot of people are still sleeping then. Well, they open the door, they throw a trash can down the middle of it, and it makes all this kind of noise, and you jump out of bed. Well, one guy didn't get out of bed fast enough. He was a deep sleeper, and they just picked him up and threw him against the wall. So after that, I'm not sure anybody slept very well. But the point is, you go through those situations together, and there's an incredible bond that forms between you. And I could still think of some of those guys that were there. And then the second time we went through, we knew a little bit more about what was going to happen, so we were a little bit better there. But yeah, there's a tremendous, anything that's difficult and people are together on, and have to work through it. And there's fear there, there's fatigue there, there's you're out in the rain and you're in the mud, and it's awful. Well, that you almost get to the point where you say, I can handle anything now. I mean, this is pretty bad. I can get through this. If I can get through this, I can go back to society and get through that too. So I think that's very definitely the case.
Do you think any of that translates into the non-military leadership world?
I do. Yeah, I think respecting leaders, knowing who the leader is, and in the military service, I don't know how the other services are, but in the Marine Corps, you may not like the individual, but you respect the position, and I think that comes across in society also. You know, the president of the company, you may not like him, you may not care for his decisions, but you do respect the position, and I think that respect is really important, because we have to subordinate ourselves sometimes and get the job done in the way that we want it to, the way they want it to be done. Marine Corps, frankly, they ask you to do things that you wouldn't think were necessarily a good idea, but you do them anyway. And I think obeying, and we've got to, in our spiritual lives, we have to obey God. We got to obey Jesus Christ, and that's the same there.
Yeah, usually we don't. There's some of those things we don't. Our flesh doesn't want to do. Right? It feels good to do something else.
Every day that comes up.
Yeah. What have you seen work as you're coaching leaders? How do they create those bonding moments in a non-military application? Have you seen anything that helps the glue?
Yeah, when I came out of the Marine Corps, I worked for EDS, Ross Perot in Dallas. I'm not sure if people remember him or not, but when we were there being trained, and by the way, that training I had was the hardest. That was harder than the Marine Corps. The 6-week training I had there, because if you didn't produce or you didn't get through it, they just let you go right there. So there was a lot of tension there.
Yeah.
But Ross Perot would eat lunch with everybody. He'd go down there and eat lunch, and after the classes were over for that day during this training session, you could walk right up to the 11th floor up there, and his door was open, and he would talk to you. And that's just so you didn't think he was this guy that's bigger than life, because he was real. You know, he looked you right in the eye, and he would care about you and all of that. In fact, I remember one time being in the office with him, and I wasn't alone. I had another couple of guys there. But he walked over to his window, and he looked down, and he said, "See that little house right there? This is in Dallas now. He's got this big building. He's successful." And he looks down this little house. He said, "There's a lady in there. We're trying to buy that land right there, and she won't sell." And you could just see the respect for that woman, that she wouldn't sell that house. Anyway, a great person to be around, really great person. I can remember one time, and I went up after the classes were done during the day, and there was this guy sitting in an office, and he was a vice president, and he was young. And I said, hey, hi, can I come in a minute? He said, sure, come on in, have a seat. And I found out who he was. And he was 35 years old. And I said, how did you get here to be a vice president of this public company? I think EDS was maybe a couple $100 million at that point, something like that. And he said, real simple. I told them to give me every job that nobody wanted to do. I've never forgotten that. And that's what got him there. And he made it happen. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a secret that you just brought up. Like, most of the people I know that have ended up in key positions didn't get paid to do the job first. They did the job and they got paid for it.
That's right. And he had an attitude of, we're just going to get it done. Ross used to say, here's what I want you to do. Here's the time I want you to get it done by. I don't care how you do it. Just don't break any laws. He would say that several times to other people that were already there, working for him. And I always thought that was pretty impressive. He didn't care. He just let you figure it out yourself. So that was kind of interesting.
I had a business guy in our church when I was in college. He said, I'll do just about anything as long as it doesn't send me to jail or hell.
Yeah, there you go. That's right.
So that was his bumpers, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't send me to jail, doesn't send me to hell.
That's right. One of the things I learned from Ross, I learned a lot from Ross. He had a lot of integrity and character. He had this deal. This was early on. He had Frito-Lay was his first account that he had in Dallas. And he was in this other one. It might have been United Airlines. I don't really remember who it was, but there was this huge contract, and he flew in to wherever United was, Chicago, I guess. And they were sitting down at this meeting, and he read through the agreement. And the guy said, by the way, we did change this one thing right here. And Ross didn't like it. He said, no, you said we were going to have a deal on what we talked about before. He said, well, it's no big deal. He walked out. It was like a $300 million contract. I really respected that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're going to pull that at the last moment, and Ross didn't like what it was that he changed
Mm-hmm.
there, and he
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't budge on it. So he walked out. Not many people can do that.
Yeah, good for you.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so often people will cave for a certain amount of money.
Yep.
You
That's
know,
right.
you and I've heard stories of very well-meaning nonprofits that were doing good things for the world and the
Yep.
community, and somebody came along and said, "Hey, I'll give you this large sum of money as long as you drift a little bit from your mission
Yep.
and expand your scope a little." And
Mm-hmm.
now, decades or later, people don't even recognize those institutions as the same as what they first began.
Yeah, that's so true.
What do you, Steve, what do you think the biggest misconception is about leadership?
I think it's that leaders know everything, because they don't. That leaders don't want to hear the truth if it's difficult, and that they really need they're people. They really need to be supported like everybody else. I think sometimes we put leaders on a pedestal a little bit. I remember in the Marine Corps, I worked Ollie North. You remember Ollie North? He
Remember the
was
name? Yes.
Yeah, he was a captain back then in the Marine Corps, and he taught ambushes, night ambushes is what the class was. And we had a meeting room that was staircase like this with the seats. It went kind of down. And the instructors in the Marine Corps at the basic school, that's what it's called for officer trained, the basic school, TBS, they're never late. I mean, they're like 10 minutes there. And when that clock hits 12, you better be in your seat. Well, the clock hit 1 p.m., which is when he was supposed to start, and Captain North was not there. And
Hmm.
we were all looking forward to this great class on ambushes. We thought that was really great. Well, 2 minutes later, he came rappelling down from the ceiling with an M16 camouflage on, shooting the M16 blanks, obviously. And I got to tell you, we went crazy. I mean, it was just unbelievable, tremendous leader, and he was the winner of a silver star, bronze star with Combat V, and he just did a lot of incredible things. And he had, if I remember correctly, he had like 30 night ambushes in Vietnam without a loss of man. That's not what he got a silver star and bronze star for, because I read those, but that was just one thing that happened. So we were all listening to him for sure.
Yeah,
I can still see him coming down from the ceiling.
I bet. I bet
Yeah.
could be a fun college professor. That's for sure.
Yeah, that'd be a little bit tougher then. He was rappelling with one arm, and he had his M16 in the other.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Do
fun.
you so you've got to hang out with a lot of leaders over the years. What do you think separates the great leaders from the good ones?
Care for people, that they really care about people. They know that they're humble. They know that they don't know it all, and they want to look out after their people. I guess I see it as two different philosophies. It's people over money, or it's money over people. And the great leaders in business, in my opinion, are people over money, especially if they're a follower of Christ. That's really, really important. And it's hard sometimes.
Yeah,
It gets tough.
yeah,
But that's, to me, that's the most important thing. If they have that, and all great leaders usually do have that. It's
yeah.
same in the Marine Corps. There's bad officers and there's good officers.
Do you think that's something that can be taught?
That's a great question. My experience is people have a way of leaning towards that. It's how they're molded when they're younger. If the bad managers I've had in my career, I had a corporate career of 20 years. I learned as much from the bad ones as I did from the good ones, and I had a lot of good ones in the Marine Corps, so I could kind of see something that was not quite right.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can learn it, but you've got to understand what it is, and you got to see it. You have to see it in action. And I was fortunate enough in the Marine Corps and the other services, I'm sure, the same way. You got these incredible leaders there that'll do anything, and so you model yourself after those.
Does it? So it doesn't have to come naturally. It's something that if
No, I
somebody
don't
had the
think.
desire,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's how they're raised too. I
hmm,
saw my father-in-law now, Don Schwartz as a dentist. He cared about he treated everybody with the same amount of respect. I used to go around with him, because they kind of adopted me and their family a little
hmm,
bit when this all happened. But I would ride around with him. He'd be talking to a relative, and here's one of their friends, and I mean, they just looked like they just came off the street and they were almost homeless or whatever. He didn't care. He respected them. He talked to them. And that was the whole time he was. And to me, that's a real man that can do that. That's really living life, letting God live through us, Jesus and the Holy Spirit to live through us, because
hmm.
Jesus died for them too. And I'll never forget that. And I'm glad I was around him at that period of time. My dad was a great
Yeah,
guy too, but I just happened to be around him longer.
yeah. I've met leaders that care about people genuinely, and I could tell you stories. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
I've often told stories about this one particular leader. I'll tell a story where he didn't seem like he cared about people, and then I'll
Mm-hmm.
tell a story where it was obvious he cared about people. And
Mm-hmm.
people, when I share these stories, I change the names, and people
Mm-hmm.
always assume it's two different people
Mm.
because this in this story he ignores somebody, brushes past them, and goes on about his business. In the
Uh-huh.
other story, he literally comes to somebody's rescue.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, People always 100% of the time assume I'm talking about two different people, and I've met a couple more leaders like this where when they're focused and on task, they can literally walk past you and go, and then a couple of minutes later go, Steve, I've been looking for you. And you're like, hey,
Mm.
you just
Yep.
passed me in the
Okay.
hall a few minutes ago, you know. But then, you somebody in the company could literally pass out. They're the ones scooping them up off the floor and rushing them to Texas Med Clinic.
Yeah.
So have you ever seen that dichotomy almost in
Oh,
leaders
sure. Sure.
that you, that unless you know them well or around them a long time, you don't know that they care, but
Yeah.
because they
I
come
think
across as gruff.
I've seen that in some of the companies that I work with. I had a 20-year career and then we had 3 businesses after that. I think we forget for a leader what they have on their shoulders sometimes, and that they get focused on that, like you said, 100%. They don't even necessarily know. The biggest attribute that makes a difference is their concern or love for people. And if they have that, and that's true in the military also. You can get jerks in the military also. They're human beings. And Ollie North was one of these. He was one that everybody loved him because he cared a lot about everybody. And you knew it. It wasn't just his
Mm,
rank, and he ended up being I think a general or a colonel or something. But I think it's that attitude of being other directed is
mm,
really important. But yeah, people get distracted. And I think when you report to somebody, you have these expectations of how they're supposed to treat you. And sometimes they're not going to be able to do that. And we just have to understand that and kind
mm.
of go with it. And that's hard sometimes.
How do you, as you're coaching executives that come to you and say, Steve, I want to, I do care about people. I want to convey that message better.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the tips and tricks you give those executives to ways that they can start to let the people know they care?
Be truthful about it. What you just said, I care about
Just say
you,
it.
and just say it. And as
Mm,
long as it's sincere, they know. I mean, and the other thing that happens, and you know this, I'm sure, Joel, is that when a person is a leader or in a position of CEO or something in a company, what they say affects a person 10 times more than it would if it was from somebody that wasn't in that position. And I think
mm,
as leaders, we forget that sometimes. And we've got to be gentle and we've got to be other directed and be careful about how we interact with people because they can be hurt. They're very delicate.
mm,
I know I am, and it's just the way we are sometimes. And I think really good leaders know that. They can sense where people are sometimes, especially when they make mistakes. A good leader, when somebody makes mistakes, they talk to them about it and try to see how they can help them rather than fire them or something of that nature. They try to work with them. And I've been fortunate to be
mhm.
around several, but I've been around some bad ones too. And so
You mentioned firing people. Eventually, we have to get there as leaders. Has it been your experience leaders get there too quickly or too slowly as a general
I think
experience?
it's both. I think it depends on the person. I was in a
Mm,
corporate position, vice president of a $200 million public company, and I had to restructure, and I had to let some people go that were my friends, frankly. That was very, very difficult. And there's no easy way to do that. I had to do it. I felt like I had to do it pretty quickly. And I don't think today I would probably do it a little bit differently than that, but I had to do it quickly.
Yeah.
And it's just hard. And I think a lot of people keep people on board too long. And what we don't realize is we're not their provider. God's their provider. And if it's not a good match, God will work that out. And if we've tried to help them, we've tried to give them the training, we were fair with them. We didn't just let them go for no reason. But if we've given them the best chance and it's not a good fit, we're not doing them any favors by keeping them on board. Now, if somebody does something that's untoward or they're not supposed to do it, it violates corporate policy. That's a different issue. But everything should be done, in my opinion. Good leaders do things fairly gently, firm, fair, and friendly. The really good ones do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been around a leader one time that he invited somebody to come meet with him. And when the meeting was over, I was convinced they had not received the message that they were in trouble because he did it so gently. And
well, there you go. Yeah, they got to get
without emotion. It was and I was witness to the conversation. He did it very professionally, very gently, and he's am I clear, and explaining what's going on and why this needs to stop, and they walked away, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not sure they understood that this was as big a deal and as large of a correction as it was.
Yeah. The communication has to be clear. If it's not a good fit right now, we're going to let you, change your career in a different direction or whatever, however. But yeah, that can happen. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's never fun, right? To be in a position where you have to let somebody go.
Well, over the years though, Joel, I learned that I'm not really the one responsible for them. It's really God that's responsible for them. And in fact, my actions could actually help somebody. We had one recently here in Houston. There was a person that had worked in this company for 15 years, was a kind of a hemorrhoid to everybody around him. And we had a C12 member become president of that company, and she let him go. And as she let him go, he said, I wondered when you were going to do that.
Wow. Yeah, he knew it was coming.
Yeah, he knew it was coming. He was disruptive. 15 years of that. Can you imagine? So,
That's
and,
crazy.
she did it very nicely and professionally and so forth. But, he went on and probably troubled somebody else along the way.
Or found something that he, was better suited for.
Hopefully better suited for. Yeah. And I think a person, as they grow in a career and become a leader, a true leader, they have to have people. The value of people has to be utmost. And we can't forget that. And it's so easy to forget it when you're tired and you're pressured and there's stress on you and all this kind of stuff. But we just have to remember that, because those are people that can influence other people, and they have a life. God loves them. He created them. Jesus died for them. And what right do I have to be a jerk to somebody, even though they deserve it, frankly? And that's hard. That's really hard.
Yeah. One last question, Steve. Well, maybe two. How do you encourage your leaders that you coach to relax? Because you just mentioned sometimes when we're tired, stressed, overworked, we tend to be harsher than we would be otherwise. How have you coached your people to find some way to rejuvenate?
Yeah, I'm going to use a spiritual term here that you're aware of. It's called abiding in Christ, staying connected, and becoming what we call neutral. And that is, I'm going to go to God and ask him what he has to say about this. And I'm going to listen the best I can. And I'm going to keep doing that till I get an answer, or some scripture jumps out at me that he gives me. And I'm going to become neutral in that if I follow what he says, I believe he wants done with this person, I'm okay with that, even if it's not what I had wanted. So the term neutral, being neutral, is I want God's will, because in Romans, as you know very well, chapter 12, verse 2, it says that his will is good, pleasing, and perfect. And so if I feel that I have that, then I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay with that. That took me a long time to learn that.
Yeah, I'm still learning it.
Well, yeah, there's different aspects of it. I am too.
Well, sir, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Any final thoughts?
No, I just appreciate being invited. I love this podcast. I love the questions that you're asking because leadership is everything. And there was a question about the leadership coming up in the future, and they're going to have to really care about people. They're going to have to really have a relationship with Christ that's strong and understand that we're not the ones that control things, and we need to do what God wants us to do and surrender our will to his so that he can live through us to other people. That sounds very preachy and so forth. But when I'm in that mode where I'm surrendered my will to his and all I want is to glorify him through what he says, I have a great day. When I'm not that way, I stray a little bit. And being neutral and trusting God to me is one of the most important things that we can learn over our life.
That's good. That's good. Well, brother, thank you for being on the show. It's the words of wisdom you shared, I'm sure, are going to impact some folks that get to view this.
Well,
And again, thank you for your time and blessings to you and Carolyn and all of our friends there in the Houston area.
Well, okay. Well, it's been a blessing being on this, and give her love to Christina. She did a nice job coordinating.
All right. Thanks, brother.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel.